So we're doing the second panel now, and we're going to start with Karen Newman. Karen Newman is a research fellow here in digital media at Coventry University, where she's developing a pioneering new Centre for Applied Research and Collaborative Practice, Birmingham Open Media. So BOM will bring together artists, computer scientists and researchers to produce new commissioned artworks and online interventions, exploring the impacts of emerging technologies on society and hacktivist culture. Newman's previous curatorial research outputs include award-winning commissioned projects with some of the most influential and exciting artists. She was curator at FACT, the UK's leading centre for art and technology between 2005 and 2010, where she contributed to Liverpool's flagship Capital of Culture programme and commissioned Apichatpong Weerasethakul's critically acclaimed multi-platform artwork Primitive, which toured internationally and resulted in the Palme d'Or winning feature film at Cannes Film Festival in 2010. Karen, there you go.
Hello. Right, well, just to start off by giving a bit more background, really, because I don't think I really fit in neatly to the kind of scholarly academic box, or at least I felt like I didn't before I started this research fellowship. But you know, if there's anywhere that I would go and work in an academic setting, I guess it would be the Centre for Disruptive Media, because that is it really synergizes or synthesizes with a lot of the things that I'm interested in. So my previous curatorial research interests have been around the relationships between vision and memory and media. Yeah, I've been a curator for about 10 years, and then over the last year or so, I've actually been actively researching new creative business models within the arts, and thinking about kind of new creative and economic spaces as a result, or that could respond to opportunities in the contemporary creative and economic climate. So it's really interesting to be presenting today and aligning what I'm doing with some of the other kind of progressive business models that are being looked at. So, well, also just to kind of go back to basics a little bit, just for anyone that's still unclear, that, just to give a bit of clarity over the term disruptive media, because it's something that we tend to kind of refer to between ourselves quite a lot in the Centre for Disruptive Media. So disruptive media, according to Clayton Christensen, who's a professor in business administration at the Harvard Business School, is something that facilitates the production of a new market and a new network of values, and eventually succeeds in disrupting an already established market and value network, typically enabling new markets to emerge. So this image is a good case in point. The mobile phone, with its built-in camera, superseded video cameras and other kind of phones, and has kind of you know, had a dramatic effect on the still and moving image camera markets as well. Just gonna move on a bit. And this is another great example of an artist's impression, I guess, of a kind of disruptive media. This is a Japanese artist called Onkuwara, who made a series of works in 1971 called I Am Still Alive. And at this point, the telegram was a dying technology. It had been kind of fast replaced by fax technology and other faster forms of communication. And he was playing on the kind of gap and the evolution of the quick kind of evolution of technologies and what had been replaced in quite a short amount of time, by referring to his own mortality. And so he would send a series of telegrams to his friends and colleagues around the world saying simply, "I am still alive." And you know, it would take a day or two for the telegram to arrive. So the person would receive the telegram, quite unusual to receive a telegram in those days still, and think, oh, he's still alive. But actually, that was 2 days ago, so maybe there's something wrong. And so it's kind of playing on that, the idea of time and the succession of technology quite quickly. I really like that example. And all too often, I think, as researchers of disruptive media, I think we tend to refer to disruptive technologies in quite globalized terms. We refer to the birth of the camera phone market and what that meant for the other kind of digital and analog film markets, and the effects of e-publishing, for example, and the implications that that kind of development has had on other kinds of scholarly publishing and other kinds of publishing. But I think there's a real opportunity here in the West Midlands to actually kind of look even more local and to actually begin to kind of think about some of the histories and local contexts here in the West Midlands that are actually really strong and really interesting for thinking about new business models for a different creative economy. So going back even further in time, I think one of the most disruptive innovations of all time possibly is Matthew Boulton and James Watt's steam engine. So this was developed through the 1700s, and it was largely responsible for the Industrial Revolution. It was a kind of key feature of transferring labour from humans to machines, and it was developed in Birmingham as a technology and exported in steam engines across the world. So it had a massive effect, and not least on the West Midlands itself, which kind of suffered as a result of its troublesome technologies, and you know, as a city, as a region that was known around the world as workshop of the world and city of 1,000 trades in Birmingham, that kind of industrial development had a massive impact. Birmingham also played a really key role in the evolution of photographic media. So lots of technologies were developed and ideas were developed, including silver plating. Silver plating was used as a fundamental part of the camera. Silver plates that were you know, built into cameras and shipped across the world. And so that was a kind of key process in the evolution of photographic media. And also Alexandra Parkes invented celluloid as the first kind of mouldable plastic. So that had its own implications and, you know, massively contributed towards the development of the still and moving image as we know it, and mass exhibition, as well as contributing to other kinds of mass consumerisms as well. In fact, by the year 2000, 4,000 inventions copyrighted in the UK. 2,800 of those came from within a 35-mile radius of Birmingham. Peter Colgate of the Patent Office stated that every year Birmingham amazes us by coming up with thousands of inventions. It's impossible to explain, but the people in this area seem to have a remarkable ability to come up with and have the dedication to produce ideas. There's just a few examples of the many things that we've produced, including Coventry's production of the first ever British car, Daimler's first ever British car, which was manufactured here in Coventry in 1897. And the regions continue to play a leading role in manufacturing and industry. More recently, it's just been announced in the last few weeks, I think, that there's a new £40 million national aerospace technology programme that's been announced for Coventry, while Google still continue their work on trying to find a solution for a driverless car, and that offers further disruptions yet to come. So Walter Benjamin's 1936 essay, again kind of leaping back in time, but it's a kind of key text to kind of rethink where we are here in the West Midlands and what mechanical reproduction means today and for the region. His essay, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, explores the effects of visual reproduction and the new possibilities afforded through photography and film for mass exhibition. So it was kind of you know, quite a few years in, actually, to film and photographic practice as a whole, and kind of thinking through what implications that those disruptive media had had on the way that we think about art, the way that we think about the original, and the way that we think about a cult kind of status associated with art. He describes the transformation that photographic media had on perceptions, authoring and transcending art's cult status. Benjamin's theory derives from Marx's philosophy, whereby modes of production form the basis for other social phenomena, including social relations and political systems, connecting ideas around class systems. And Marxism has gained new popularity in recent years, connecting ideas around class systems and thinking about contemporary capitalism in the wake of a global economic crisis. References can be seen in artistic programmes across cultural spheres over recent years, including exhibitions, festivals and publishing in the UK, particularly since 2012. And the image at the bottom is is an image from Liverpool Biennial in 2010, which featured a Marxist lounge with all of the kind of literature by Karl Marx and associated with Marxism. Urban studies theorist Richard Florida has talked about how the economic crisis currently has actually boosted innovation in his book, The Great Reset. He says these periods of crises and recovery are periods of the most rapid innovation in capitalism. And he goes on to say, when thinking about the economic crash and what would happen, I made the counter-proposition that in fact not only would cities like New York and London not fail as a result of the financial crash, but as of 2008, I said they would emerge stronger. And the shift change that Florida is referring to also involves a cull of broadly middle-class jobs, which has a particular resonance for the wave of creative destruction, as we're currently witnessing it, in relation to high culture. Creative destruction is a term also used by Karl Marx to think about capitalist development and how that results occurs as a result of creative destruction of the previous economic system. So here you can see that actually GVA, so gross value added, the products produced by a country, actually increased between around 2008, 2009, and it's continued to increase. So the creative industries have actually been very good at responding to opportunities for innovation despite other kind of silos of activity, such as museums, galleries and libraries, which have actually suffered as a result of public funding cuts. They've actually decreased their performances and productions and employability. So it seems that maybe those kinds of creative industries haven't been able to respond as quickly or effectively to some of the opportunities that the crisis has caused. So I kind of think about those in terms of the superstructures, the contemporary art superstructures that have evolved, particularly through the 20th century, and the GVA of the creative industries increased by 15.6% since 2008, compared with an increase of 5.4% for the rest of the UK economy. That's quite staggering, actually, that the creative industries had a much higher increase overall than the UK economy. And I think that's a really different picture to what a lot of contemporary art publicly funded spaces would paint. The kind of contemporary art superstructure that was formed and evolved through the 20th century, which is predominantly 90% public funded by places like the Arts Council. In the 2013 report, Rebalancing the Creative Capital, a report by Peter Stark, Christopher Gordon and David Powell lobbied for the continued growth of clusters of internationally innovative and competitive cultural and creative production, contributing to sustainable regional and economic growth, and the development of new models for sustainable provisions of high-quality facilities and programmes for participation in and enjoyment of the arts, contributing to well-being in individuals and communities. That's a report that more heavily talks about or argues for a more equal distribution of funding between London and the region, which is, an incredibly strong point which needs to be made. But there are little glimpses in that are also kind of relevant to thinking about, what kind of new models. This is the most important thing from my point of view. What kind of new models of cultural production do we need to adopt in today's creative and economic climate to move forward and to kind of capture the rise in creative industries and economy that other initiatives have been able to respond to. So I think within the last 8 years particularly, and this is something that's formed a kind of key part of my research when thinking about new business models for the arts, has been the maker movement, which has enjoyed a burgeoning scene with hacker spaces and fab labs designed for DIY, cross-innovation and learning through doing. These spaces offer a range of tools from electronics, robotics, 3D printing, CNC tools, woodworking, metalworking, arts and crafts, a whole variety of things, round the clock, open access to members, and cross-innovation work. So opportunities to kind of learn through peer-to-peer production and different ways of learning. And more recently, some joined-up initiatives in London around the London Bridge Business Improvement District have been looking at cities such as Barcelona with thriving maker cultures to see how they could import that kind of cultural activity into a place like London and to see what it could potentially do for cultural regeneration. And I've got a note to myself here, which was Craig was talking about how, you know, it's a kind of interesting connection to folklore actually, and thinking about folklore right now. And I think it's a really interesting connection to make here today. Is thinking about, as I have been, actually how can you respond to a subculture to kind of remodel the culture at large, and I think there's an opportunity there. Simultaneously, the rising cost of higher education and student debt has seen the rapid spread of open education or endeavours to provide open access to educational engagement and experience and open educational resources, of which the Centre for Disruptive Media has been a particularly active player. The Centre's media department was the first practical media department in the country to start broadcasting lectures to the iTunes U platform and to the YouTube Edu platform in 2009, following a boom in massive open online courses, or MOOCs, as they're also called. And the media department's innovated in teaching and learning through open technologies and pedagogies, including the development of the world's first open iPhone application for a photography degree course, as well as various other projects in open education and photography and creative activism. Living Books About Life is a great example of one of the university's, one of the centre's experiments in open access. This is a series edited by Claire Birchall, Gary Hall and Joanna Zalinska. That's a series of curated open access books about life, with life understood both philosophically and biologically, which provide a bridge between the humanities and the sciences. And it's produced by a globally distributed network of writers and editors. It repackages existing open source access science research by clustering it around selected topics, selected themes, whose unifying theme is life. So air, agriculture, bioethics, cosmetics, electronic waste, energy, numerology, pharmacology. So anyone can add to this, you can remix it, you can download it, you can contact the authors and contribute a book towards it if you so wish. Since 2012, the Wellcome Trust has also adopted a policy whereby all of the research it supports has to be made available in an online open access publication or repository as a condition of all of its funding that it gives out. And the new availability of open data, information that's available for anyone to use for any purpose at no cost, has provided greater transparency between the government's collection of data and public understanding, with initiatives such as www.data.gov and data.gov.uk designed to promote innovation that encourage the use and reuse of government data sets. And the Open Data Institute was also established in 2012 by Professor Nigel Shadbolt and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, catalysing the evolution of open data culture to create economic, environmental and social value. And they do a whole range of stuff. They just commissioned some artworks by various different creative practitioners, including Ellie Harrison, who made this great piece called Vending Machine, which sat in the offices of the Open Data Institute and was hooked up to various different news streams online. So whenever there was news of a financial crisis, the vending machine would automatically empty its whole contents. So it would give free food. So a really nice piece of work. Okay, and one of the Centre's latest experiments is a new model of applied research for art and technology called BOM, or Birmingham Open Media. Birmingham Open Media responds to the substantial developments in digital culture that phenomenon like open access, open data and open source offer. BOM seeks to explore new creative practices and debates relating to open media and our everyday interaction with technologies. BOM's the major output of my research fellowship in digital media within the Centre, which began in August. And I'm already feeling the pressure to deliver the output before the end of my research fellowship in August. So our new commissions will bring together, as Yannicka said, artists, technologists and researchers to collaborate on cross-innovation artworks using interactive technologies and interventions in the public realm. That includes interventions across the internet, exploring things like steganography, which is the process of concealing secret information in image files, as was used by the terrorists who organised 9/11. BOM sits within an emerging practice of art and technology centres, such as iShed in Bristol, Culture Lab and Mixed Reality Lab, Culture Lab in Newcastle and Mixed Reality Lab in Nottingham. And these kind of new spaces offer different ways for producing cultural content and audience engagement, typically bringing together creative practitioners such as artists with researchers and technologists to develop cross-innovation collaborative projects which eventually find their way to public audiences. Research is central to these new spaces, and this is something that I looked at a lot in my research, and like what kind of new program do artists need to innovate and create going forward, and what kind of programs do audiences need to engage with that have currency and urgency. So iShed, for example, partners with the University of the West of England and Bristol University. Mixed Reality Lab is based at Nottingham University, and Culture Lab is based at Newcastle University. And these collaborations allow for the spaces, such as iShed and Culture Lab and Mixed Reality Lab. They offer those organisations free access to specialist academic and technical knowledge. And for the higher education institution, they offer valuable research outputs with critical recognition exterior to the academic environment, which can be used for submission to, for example, the Research Excellence Framework, or REF, to attract future research funding and develop the prestige of the institution. And I think this is also it's a nice way of kind of moving forward and working, and a kind of move away from the way that I've previously worked with researchers and research-based practices. So this was a project kind of tagged onto an exhibition which I curated at FACT, Foundation for Art and Creative Technology in Liverpool. We did an exhibition called Persistence of Vision, which looked at the interplay of vision, memory, media. And we, as part of that process, I wanted to work with vision experts and memory studies experts and neuroscientists, and kind of pull together different ways of thinking. I guess I'm always kind of, to my own trouble, sometimes actually interested in different perspectives, and I would rather not just work with a memory studies expert or a neuroscientist and just go with their opinion, but I'd rather just collect a range of different perspectives when I'm putting together a creative program, and to kind of let those different perspectives influence the way that I develop a project, an exhibition, a curated exhibition, you know, or let it inform a conversation with an artist, which actually develops somewhere along the line into a new piece of artwork. So with this project, I don't think this was the best exhibition that I've ever curated at all. However, it was the easiest one for the university to get their head around in terms of the REF submission. So we did a group exhibition in the gallery with 9 different international contemporary artists, a lot of new work around the exhibition thematic, and then we commissioned a series of interactive touchscreen games in our media lounge, which we used as the kind of first encounter with our audience. So we worked with the Visual Perception Lab at Liverpool University. We created these games which explored things like matrix memory and face recognition and spatial awareness and those sorts of things. And we got people, we were interested in basically the kind of re-evaluating how brains were being wired and behaviours were being directed differently, post-digital, native. So the idea that actually everyone's grown up with technology in the new generation, how do they now respond to different stimuli, and how is that different to our own, our digital immigrants? So we captured a lot of data from these online games. We did it online, and we did it physical interfaces in the media lounge. And the data that we captured was fed back to the Visual Perception Lab for them to study and to use towards their sort of future research. We also commissioned pretty sort of standard publication, bringing together different perspectives from the memory studies experts and different the neuroscientist, and me and the other curator wrote text, and we kind of pulled together all of that kind of thinking in a publication. And the exhibition toured. But actually, I mean, that's all great, but then you go on to your next exhibition, or actually curators often have a break, and while another curator does something, and then you come back to it. And so your kind of curatorial research interests kind of fluctuate, and things kind of come back in and out of sight for audiences. Most of the time they're not. and you kind of call back on people that you might have known years ago. Anyway, what's great about being inside a university and creating cultural programs, but working within a university, is that it gives you access and surrounds you with academic thought and knowledge, awareness of what other people are doing and interests, and makes you approach things in really different terms. So I think this is a much more kind of sustainable and thought through model of practice, and I think that's why it's working really well in places like iShed and Mixed Reality Lab and Culture Lab, is because they have that ongoing relationship with the university. Not just a relationship, but it is the academic. It's turning the model inside out in a way. It's like putting the academics in the arts institution and working towards outputs that are collaborative and that have mutual benefit for everybody. Where are we? So here we go, back to BOM. So BOM will offer cross-innovation artworks commissions. So in the kinds of ways that I was describing, we'll develop those through hackathons in our lab space. Co-working spaces for artists. So the image on the left is one of the spaces that will be used as a kind of co-working bench and table. So kind of moving away from artists, kind of traditional artist studio settings. It's kind of piloting something, just trying to get my head around membership fees, because actually co-working is a really successful phenomenon recently for office workers. It's a kind of new concept, I think, in terms of the way that artists work outside of the hackerspace world. So yeah, we're gonna try that. We're gonna try and put artists together and let them brush shoulders with technologists and all kinds of other creative people. We'll have a photography studio. So I've got a mix of we're a social enterprise and absolutely don't want to be a charity. I've got 2 commercial partnerships on board that cover the rent. One of them is a photography studio, which is moving into the basement, a commercial photography studio, and the other is a cafe partner. And we'll do a whole range of stuff with Google Hangouts, digital production facilities. We'll have an old-fashioned darkroom as well. So we offer a whole range of kind of digital and analog production facilities and thinking spaces. It looks pretty crap at the moment, and it will probably still look a bit crap when it's done, because we've got a really minimal budget. It's taken about 9 months of negotiation to get £35,000 private investment from a company, which is literally half of the budget. We've just got my Arts Council funding, which is 30k, so we can kind of kick off the capital project, but it is still going to look pretty raw. This is iBeam Centre for Art and Technology in New York. So retaining all the kind of breeze block and the brick and all that kind of stuff, the idea is that it's a space where artists and researchers and people can just come together and meet and share ideas and mess up, and it doesn't matter if it gets messy. And this is one of the disruptive media that I'm actually exploring at the moment, which is a fucking giant roasting machine, which has its own disruptive implications for a building which is 8 stories high and needs a flue going all the way to the top of the building. But in terms of where the space sits, which is in a business improvement district, there currently isn't a great footfall around where the space is. So it looks here, and if I could get onto Google Street View, I'd show you around. It's opposite an adult cinema, which I quite like the idea. It's conveniently situated between Legs 11 and Adult World. And so for me, this could be the new Soho of Birmingham. But you know, if you look at the moment, and this was also part of the thinking, that at the moment, if you come into Birmingham, and Birmingham was important, by the way, because probably much to the disappointment of Coventry, for me, moving down from Liverpool and thinking about a space to put a national artist support programme for digital media and photography, I needed to be close to a train station. I needed to be close to the kind of main point that people come into the city. So it's for national audiences as well as kind of local. And so for me, I really wanted to be close to the train station. At the moment, as a cultural destination, the city doesn't really work. Actually, Coventry works a lot better than Birmingham at the moment. But you come into New Street and you either go 15 minutes to the left to get to Icon, or you'd go 15 minutes to the right to get down to where all the other cool stuff is happening in Digbeth. And occasionally you might go to the library or to the Museum and Art Gallery, but generally you wouldn't. So BOM is trying to be a kind of agent for creative regeneration, but also to try and kind of sit in the middle of everything and help to join things up a bit. And it looks like that. So I've just kind of run away there. But yeah, just kind of in terms of the centre and what it's trying to do in terms of exploring counter models to sort of traditional models of academic learning and things like the University of Culture, which have been referred to before, and the University of Excellence, and removing barriers between formal and informal learning, access and engagement, and supporting continuous professional development. So this is a way that BOM can help, because we'll be supporting creative entrepreneurs. I know that word's been used quite a bit today. We'll be doing that through mentoring and support packages and social entrepreneurs network, as well as co-working space, as well as all of the production facilities and commissions and events that we have going on as well. So we'll be doing that as a kind of inside-outside model to how we learn in the classroom here, and how people will continue learning after they leave the university. And so just to kind of end really on an image that I think is particularly pertinent in terms of where the West Midlands are, as, you know, a region that's kind of been built around the car, and you really feel that if you come to somewhere like Coventry, that the flyover still really dominates, the kind of physical flyover and whatever that is. Artist Namjoon Paik's essay, Media Planning for the Post-Industrial Society, the 21st Century, is now only 26 years away. He presented that paper at the Rockefeller Foundation in 1974, at a time when the West Midlands was also already starting to feel the disruption of its own car manufacturing industry's decline. Pike pictured an altogether different kind of highway, the electronic superhighway. So he proposed the idea of the information superhighway, and he foresaw a broadband communication revolution in amazing detail, even at that point, with all of the possibilities for instant unifying connectedness that the internet would bring in years to follow. He felt that moving to America from Korea, and actually feeling the kind of disconnect and kind of social chaos and a kind of ethnic split, of a cultural kind of split. And he saw the way that potentially new media could be used as a kind of connected television between children's living rooms and connect cultures together. Kind of amazing vision at that point. And I think maybe this is kind of something interesting to kind of leave on in terms of thinking where the West Midlands is, because for all of its clumsy accomplishments, I think the region seems particularly well placed to remodel itself as a UK leading centre for creative innovation, albeit a different kind of superhighway to the one that we have built. Thanks.
So I'm just going to introduce Mark America now. So Mark America has exhibited his interdisciplinary artwork in many venues, including the Whitney Biennale, the Walker Arts Centre, the Denver Art Museum, the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, the Istanbul Biennale, the Biennale de Montreal, and the American Museum of the Moving Image. His comprehensive mid-career retrospective was recently exhibited at the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens. A cult novelist, media theorist, web publisher, and live audio-visual artist who has performed internationally, America is the author of many books of fiction and non-fiction, including his recently published book, Remix the Book, by University of Minnesota Press, and a large collection of artist writings entitled Metadata and Digital Poetics, also by the MIT Press.
Glitch. Ontology. Glitch. Ontology. Glitch. Ontology. Glitch. Ontology. The verbi, voco, visual apparatus, corrupted. Corrupted. At its core, rupturing, the image faces its digital other and wonders, can I relate? Can I relate? Can I relate to the other images intersubjectively remixing their stories on the go in auto affect mode. The images say, I too am digital. The images seem to ask, but how can I relate? How can I remediate? Is there a virtual light at the end of the tunnel? Emitted by whom? Captured by what? Processed through what remixological apparatus? What apparatus already finds itself unconsciously pre-programming our aesthetic vision of a literature still yet to come? To come, as in to write. To come to writing. This glitch mechanism has been making a ghost appearance for centuries now. Think of it as the specter of e-lit, of networked literary presence, of intersubjective agency captured in the transmission of mirroring neurons. Mirroring neurons. You can read about it in the freely downloadable user's manual. I'm thinking of that section where it is written, quote, engineering the difference via optimized ontological machining. This fused deconstruction modeling program enables vital critical making like never before. You too can experience the pleasure of the text by simply allowing yourself to machine the machine. Machine the machine. Some assemblage required. Some textual frottage required. Rubbing these algorithmic texts together as if to generate some kind of heat and conjure up yet more digital images. Is this what it means to charge language to the utmost possible degree? These images keep making their apparition of an appearance and ask us, what does it mean to program desire in a robotic world that strains to create? These too are the images of the world we travel through, the world of cognitive mapping and QuickTime virtual light stitched together as a glitch collage made out of the source material everywhere. And it was written, glitch is the soul in the machine. Everybody, please join in. Glitch is the soul in the machine. Together, glitch is the soul in the machine. Yes, glitch is the soul in the machine. Glitch is the soul in the machine, even as that same machine machines the glitch in its own image. And as anyone with a history of dead bodies lying in their wake will tell you, hacking that process is always already an inside job. We can say every story is a travel story, a spatial practice. These spatial practices, these trance rituals, transfigured in time, are wired into our DNA. These interstitial rubbings, these moments of textual frottage, why is it so stimulating to me? Why can't I keep my eyes off it? Writing is the flesh I just can't keep my eyes off of. Writing is the strange attractor I just can't stop rubbing myself against. It's driving me wild, again, always, and I really can't stop myself. I just want to touch it, writing, to lick its outer edge, writing, and slowly, if it will let me, go in deep. Go in deep and take hold of it the way I take hold of any apparatus, and just make it come back to writing, to write, to turn it on while mutually remediating. A profusion of uncensored glitch markings that leave a raw data trace. The hand-coded smear of a glitchy markup language that always tells the tale of metadata, the tale of the tale of metadata circulating in this intersubjectively worked space foods mediating.
Thank you, Mark. The video is now ended. So if you want to come in.
Yep. So, yeah. And you might consider that a creative outcome, one that's generated from a practice-based research methodology sponsored primarily by the UK's Abandoned Normal Devices in conjunction with Corner House and FACT Liverpool and the former Folly in Lancaster, but also the Atlas Institute and the Center for Humanities and Art, both located at the University of Colorado. And it's an excerpt from my project, Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, which is at glitchmuseum.com, and I think we have it on the screen if you want to just click click the homepage. Thanks. So the last time that I actually performed my Glitch Ontology Manifesto as an opening was before a live audience. It was last November at the Conservatoire in the heart of Paris as part of my recent stint as the LABEX International Research Chair at the University of Paris 8, where my colleagues invited me to deliver what they termed, and I'll put it in quotes, a hybrid conference, something that really has no definition or translation in English per se, but that, because we don't know what it is, means we can discover it on our own as part of the heuretic process. By heuretic, I'm actually referring to Gregory Ulmer's book Heuretics, where he starts off talking about grammatology and says that theory is assimilated into the humanities in two principal ways, by critical interpretation and by artistic experimentation. And so this, to me, is what makes that kind of post-humanities, to borrow the terminology for this event, practice-based. The artist as performer, new media theorist, applied remixologist, maybe provocateur of radical pedagogy can creatively hack the institutional context they find themselves in, should they be, say, as in my case, a professor of art and art history, but who also, really out of necessity, is still the same underground fiction writer they've always been. See, for example, my 1993 novel, Coffin Chronicles, or the 1995 novelization or Songs of Nadruvor. That novel is called Sexual Blood. So this hybrid conference that I was asked to give in Paris, it ends up as something like an embodied praxis, one that performs its theoretical agenda by sampling from whatever source material feels attractive at the time of composition and can be intuitively manipulated for aesthetic purpose, or if not purpose, then at least playfulness, or if not aesthetic playfulness, maybe what I mean is aesthetic fitness, as in the survival of the fittest, because it is an embodied praxis after all. So when I ended the reading of the Glitch Ontology Manifesto in Paris a few months ago, I didn't really segue into the next bit by saying, you know, that's a creative outcome and it's one that's generated from a practice-based research methodology, you know, sponsored by this unusual alignment of UK arts organizations powered by, as Anne likes to refer to themselves, the anarchic imagination, as well as these various academic units at the University of Colorado. Instead, after the video stopped playing and I had finished delivering the manifesto actually on the same stage that Berlioz debuted his Symphonie Fantastique in 1830, after everything had come to a momentary standstill, there was a long pause, we'll call it a pregnant pause, and I looked out at the audience and I asked, what else am I going to be able to remix? And the reason I asked that question is because again, this underground novelist in me, the one who transcribes his unconscious readiness potential into these morphing theoretical fictions across all manner of transmedia interfaces and digitally contextualized compositional environments, is always looking for, I'm always looking for, we might even say hunting for more source material to sample from so as to continually feed my creative intellect and transmute whatever energy there may be in the source material into a kind of pseudo-autobiographical narrative, one that supposedly runs parallel to the life and times of this figure whose cloud of metadata somehow translates into the work of a persona referred to in the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics as the Artist 2.0. So the Glitch Ontology Manifesto that gets sampled into the hybrid conference is actually an outgrowth of the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, or what we have ended up calling MOGA for short. And I say we because MOGA is a collaborative art project that challenges what I think to be conventional fine arts and humanities practices. In fact, to my utter surprise, although I think I have finally gotten used to it, We is a dangerous word in a Department of Art and Art History, especially one that still finds itself not only rooted in, but in a way stuck in the muck of 19th century studio art practices and the scholarly art histories that run parallel to them. So we is not the individual studio artist as genius, but more like the collaboratively networked realm of the potential scenius, to use Eno's term. We who do it ourselves and see where imaginary practices in the process of being discovered can take us. So I mentioned that in many ways, this idea of the practice-based researcher is a kind of extension of the underground fiction writer that I've always been. And that's another way of saying being a practice-based researcher is really what it means to be a kind of creative manipulator of data and its ability to creatively manipulate data by lucidly evolving one's aesthetically attuned remixological filters that I think we can begin disrupting and altering not only the humanities landscape, but perhaps the stuck in the mud position of so much of the STEM fields that, for example, the creative industries find themselves codependent on. So it ends up that for me, DH has always stood for disrupting or disruptive humanities. And the digital part is just the latest evolutionary instance of what has always felt like a rival tradition in art and writing, one that can be traced back as far as you want to go. I'll choose to go with, say, Lawrence Stern as a metafictionally attuned practice-based researcher disrupting the interface. But there, in this case, the interface of the book or the literary interface. But there obviously are many more. So my basic theory when it comes to practice-based research in early 21st century, right, digitally networked culture, is that back in the day, at least this is based off my experience in Colorado, back in the day, if you wanted to play with technology, and especially if you wanted to have access to the tools that would allow you to experiment with computational processes, most of the time you had to go into fields like engineering or computer science. But the dramatic shifts that have taken place in consumer culture, right, from the introduction of the personal computer to accessing the fast speed internet to nomadically wandering the desert of the real by way of semi-smart mobile media technologies now at our disposal, have really reset the operational and behavioral conditions that we find ourselves in. So having access to the necessary digital media technology, one needs to start experimenting in their own fictional undertakings, right? Their construction of online, digital, or flux personae by way of intuitive and aesthetic manipulation of the data of everyday life, has opened up humanities research to an area that practice-based researchers are quite familiar with, right? The field of making, right? Image making, conceptual language making, film making, performance making, even object making, theory making, database making, remix, code making, social media performance making. My students today who outside of the institution are all about the using of digital media technologies to personally express themselves often find themselves kind of time traveling back into a world that resembles 1980s academia, as if none of this other stuff has ever happened. Meanwhile, most, if not all of the students in my seminar this semester started using the internet when they were 4 or 5 years old. And I don't take that term using very lightly. It's a term that floats around the underground drug culture as well and relates to the algebra of need, a phrase introduced to us by the beatnik junkie writer William Burroughs. In fact, in an interview for the 50th anniversary publication of Naked Lunch, Burroughs was asked about the algebra of need, and he responded by saying, "By the algebra of need, I simply meant that given certain known facts in an equation, and the equation comprising a situation of absolute need, any form of need, you can predict the results. Leave a sick junkie in the back room of a drugstore, and only one result is possible. The same is true of anyone in a state of absolute hunger, absolute fear. The more absolute the need, the more predictable the behavior." Now, I'm not, of course, trying to compare all of our mobile phone toting, Facebook updating twittering students to heroin addicts. In fact, the speed with which many of us, even transitional figures who started on the internet in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, have unconsciously embedded these emerging and now quite instrumental operational behaviors into our conceptual machinery, excuse me, signals an opening for the culture at large to reimagine what it means to become, say, an innovative artist operating in the rival tradition. In the case of the avant-garde, it may be even referred to as an anti-tradition, a kind of a living archive composed of what in Remix the Book I call source material everywhere. And that repositions this hybridized practice-based researcher post-humanist as an applied remixologist who models different versions of how to do the humanities as an activist, say, hack, think process worth personally expressing yourself in. So as someone who's not only big on documenting their creative project development, but also theorizing, excuse me, and speculating on future forms of artistic practice, as well as their relationship to the university's growing interest in creative research and pedagogy, my goal has been, is, and always will be to advocate for a more advanced avant-garde arts research agenda as an essential part of the university. And we, in fact, are starting a new practice-based PhD program in intermedia art, writing, and performance at Colorado. And the main reason I advocate for this kind of thing is because I think it's becoming clear to all the stakeholders that practice-based artistic research methods involve creative work processes that provide a valuable alternative to the more ingrained scholarly practices and scientific practices. And there are perhaps two predictable outcomes. For example, the scholarly monograph, or even in an academic arts context, the fine arts gallery show. And now that so many of our students have access to the conceptual machinery required to operationalize their ongoing and unconsciously generated information behaviors, I wonder if even there's a choice in the matter. How else to stay aesthetically fit? I think I'll end it there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. So are there any questions for either Mark or Karen? Any ideas, comments?
The idea of innovation has come up quite a bit, hasn't it, actually, today, which is quite interesting. Sort of redefining what innovation is today and new models, new structures to be able to deal with what innovation is and how it happens differently, which I think is quite nice. There's a few things that have come up, which is nice connections to make. Sorry, did you have a question? I'll stop talking.
Yeah, thanks a lot for both presentations. Very interesting connections and very interesting contrast between the two. And I would like to maybe pick up on Mark's very final sentence, how to stay fit aesthetically. I really like that question. And let me kind of bring that back to the first talk, because what struck me was the omnipresence of the word lab and laboratories in relation to all these experiments. And coming from science studies, for me, laboratories are or have been kind of conventionally conceived of as, well, not very creative places, because the whole idea is that they discover things that are supposed to exist anyway. Whereas I guess what you've been trying to articulate was exactly new modes of creation. And so basically, this is just a comment and maybe also an invitation to Mark to think about, okay, what are the others of labs when it comes to creative process? How could we stay fit aesthetically that is not necessarily the aesthetics of laboratories?
Yeah, sure. Good questions. So as part of this new practice-based PhD program in intermediate art writing and performance, we're trying to find ways to bring artists and humanists together in what we are calling a studio collaboratory. And it's not really just artists and humanists. Those would be the primary players in the studio collaboratory. But we'd also invite others as well: media studies scholars, information scientists, etc. In fact, we're finding that there's a bit of stuck in the mudness in the science labs right now in terms of like how to generate innovation and creativity, and they're turning more and more to the studio critique model as a way to try and initiate some collaborative energy and bring people in from different areas. So the lab itself, we might call it a playground as well, or a sandbox. It's really more just like an open setting for researchers to collaborate with each other. Maybe it's even more like a meta lab. It's kind of like an umbrella for various research projects to take place in.
Just add to that, I remember turning up at the Visual Perception Lab at Liverpool University years ago, being really disappointed that actually it was just a room with some things on the wall, and didn't, and then actually went to see a visual perception, a vision scientist in a different department, and he showed me some much more sexy looking equipment, so I kind of felt a bit more satisfied. But I think the idea of a lab, certainly within the arts, is kind of thought about as, it's a concept, right? It's used as a sort of like, I was using the word kitchen for a long time. I kind of thought about BOM as an artist's kitchen, where people would just meet and cook up ideas and experiment. It's just it's a space for exchange. And from what Mark was saying as well, actually, the collaboration and knowledge exchange has come across in recent years as being more and more important. And I think this is one way that universities can play a really key role in broader cultural programs, because they are filled with brilliant academics with great ideas that have far too much time to think, that actually can be really inspiring and influential to artistic programs and the way that artists develop their ideas and other people develop their ideas, and they can be challenging in all sorts of ways. And so for me, the lab is it's the space. It's not even, we don't even have the Centre for Disruptive Media isn't even a real building. It's not a centre. We're it doesn't really exist. But in the same way that a kind of lab doesn't necessarily need to be a physical place with sexy equipment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's I hear myself talking to myself, so I had to stop for a second. It's also a kind of building on what Karen's talking about. It seems like a more fluid and hybridized concept of what a lab can be. So it can exist online, it can exist in modular spaces, and also, I must say, something that I've always been interested in my role here in Colorado is locating ways to bring it out into the community. So we have alternative galleries and museums throughout the Denver Boulder region who we partner with. And so what we might think of as the lab, which is basically where a lot of us meet and collaborate and research, we then bring it out into the community. And that's, in a way, just taking the lab to another space. So it's really sort of hybridized in that way.
You talk about glitch, which to me essentially means error, which sort of harks back to the old analog days. Why don't you go back to analog? And also, how does remix radically differ from postmodernism?
Yeah. I was going to also mention, when Karen had talked about going to that other lab and finding all the sexy equipment there, one of the things that's kind of interesting from the perspective of I think, folks who are identifying with disruptive digital humanities is that older equipment is, in some cases, sexy as well. One of the labs that we're collaborating with here in Colorado is called the Media Archaeology Lab, and there's lots of old computers and equipment, floppy disks, etc., around, and we're using those computers actually to investigate works of electronic literature and early works of net art in their kind of their native environments, right? The technology, the hardware, software that they were originally created on, and using that as source material to develop new work in. Regarding the history of remix, it goes way back, of course. That's why I mentioned, in fact, my own remix of La Trémonde's The Songs of Maldoror as part of, it was basically my second novel called Sexual Blood. The first one, The Kafka Chronicles, is kind of an elaborate remix of Metamorphosis by Kafka as well. If you read La Trémonde's The Songs of Maldoror, you'll realize that he was very much a plagiarist. He said that plagiarism was necessary and that progress depended on it. And so he was pulling from a lot of the Goth Lit and other scientific manuals, etc., of his time. I mentioned William Burroughs in my presentation and The Algebra of Need. Of course, Burroughs, with the painter Brian Gysin, was responsible for having started the literary cut-up. You can look at the way that the Cubists were integrating material elements into the paint, like chair caning or newspapers, etc., all the way through, say, well, Situationist de Tournemont, of course, was part of the history of remix as well. So remix appropriation methods have a long history. And so I'm not trying to suggest that there's anything particularly new about the idea of remix. In fact, if you look at the Open Humanities Press book that I created in conjunction with Gary and the other editors, you'll see that I'm suggesting that it's actually co-evolutionary. It's like it's part of who we are, and it goes all the way back to the beginning in a way. Like we're all born remixers is the way that I put it in Remix the Book. And there's also a survey of other forms of remix and other ways of looking at it, including like film collage at the remixthebook.com website. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that history that it grows out of, and then just look at how it's being put into practice today with the data of everyday life, or what I call the source material everywhere, sort of at our fingertips, and how easy it is to manipulate that data and screw it up, to use Flusser's term, and then redistribute it throughout the network.
Yeah, just also, I mean, I'm a big fan of old media, and actually the last place that I worked after FACT was a photography gallery, and we went through a capital project and the director decided not to have a dark room, because there was this idea that actually all artists just work digitally nowadays. But it's rubbish, actually. The number of artists that would say to me, or photographers, you're going to have a dark room, and they really miss the social space, the communication and collaboration that was come through that physical space, but also the opportunity to experiment with old histories and old medias, and it's also about kind of craft and skill, and dying. As technologies move on, then there becomes an interest in old technologies as well, and that's really a way of kind of recontextualizing and rehistoricizing and lending sort of fresh light to what's going on now with different technologies. And so I think that's really important. But also, just in relation to glitch, I think glitch is a really interesting area in terms of cybersecurity. It's the place where problems happen. So one thing I've been keen to do here in the Centre for Disruptive Media is to try and broker a partnership with the Ethical Hacking Lab at Coventry University, which sometimes gets me into trouble. We've got really different approaches to how we think about hacking. And for me, the kind of tension between those two approaches is a really interesting space. Because, yeah, it's where the problems happen, and actually where the really interesting things impact that's ripe for exploration, I think.
And this is why this kind of curial activity is, I think, so important. Karen's mentioning the tensions with the other lab. You think of curation also as a practice-based research process, and perhaps one of the primary ways of hacking or culturally critiquing, the very creative industries and security industries and spying industries that are kind of growing up all around us, and that the arts and humanities now find themselves somewhat codependent on. And so how do we hack those systems?
Hello. I'm having some trouble formulating this question, really, but I'm not quite sure. It might come out a bit vague, and I'm a bit wary of stepping on science studies kind of territory. But I'm just concerned about the kind of creative destruction of the humanities and the kind of new model of knowledge production based on fluid, non-existent laboratories of interdisciplinary, etc., etc. But like, how far is that a part of the marketisation of higher education, and does that not worry anyone? I mean, we kind of talked about this in the original panel, and then there's this uncomfortable synergy, to use a university management term, between the critical theory and the production of new modes of knowledge production and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, where does the critique come into it? You know, the traditional role of humanities, etc. And it sounds kind of spectacularly productive, these, to go back to this earlier term, these laboratories of creative production and stuff, you know. You know what I mean? It's a kind of open, vague question, but it worries me a little bit.
Well, I think worrying is a good thing. I think Woody Allen's made a career out of it, actually. And those are the kinds of questions or worries that we would want to bring into lab. So it's not so much an embrace of innovation and, you know, the creative economies or industries. It's accepting the fact that that is part of the dialogue now in the ongoing corporatization of the university, and then using it as source material, again, to hack into. I was talking in the presentation and the performance I gave, I kind of sample from Ezra Pound talking about, and I think I mentioned in relation to glitch being possibly the charging language to the utmost possible degree. He was referring to poetry, of course. But, you know, so to be aware of Pound and to be aware of his writing, for example, and his theorizing as an artist, and then to sample from it and bring it into performance, and then to bring that into a hybridized, fluid, yes, interdisciplinary or intermedia lab setting within a university that invites artists and researchers from many different backgrounds to come in and address these questions and to address these worries and to anticipate where the questions are and the future worries are going to be is something that I think is quite necessary. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who identifies themselves as an academic artist or a humanities scholar has to actually do that, or be, you know, as just a mode of survival. These things can coexist, but they do need to coexist. It's not that one is less relevant than the other, and in fact they work together. It's kind of what I'm getting at.
Gary's the perfect person to answer this one.
But Gary is the perfect person to answer.
Okay, let me try and think. Okay, so we're very worried about critique. But if I mean, you know, Karen started off and she's talking about Marx and things, but if we'd have said, you know, it's the Centre for the Study of Marx, or it's the Centre for the Study for Dialectical, you know, Hegelianism or something, we'd have lasted about 2 minutes, or they wouldn't have let us set it up, or whatever. You know, and partly one of the issues around critique, and it kind of goes back to what Sarah was saying, is about finding little spaces and niches. One of the things people would say theoretically about critique is it's kind of too oppositional, too obvious. You can kind of, you know, you're just standing yourself up there as a target, and they're going to get you. And it's harder and harder to have spaces for critique in the universities. It's trying to find a space in the university where we'll get away with some of this stuff. So yeah, they're going to put pressure on us for targets and finances and things, and it's the same, you know, there's less funding for the arts and art centres. But can we come up with something that's kind of going to have that double role? So it does have a space for entrepreneurialism and the kind of creative and cultural entrepreneurialism that Karen specialising in, that Sarah was talking about in like scholars, entrepreneurs. For example, I was in a conference in Mexico, and that was on critical management studies. But they were saying because Mexico public funding is not really great and doesn't survive very well, so they have to kind of work as entrepreneurs to just do interesting critical work. But their argument is, well, why does entrepreneurship have to be just associated with the right? And why let them have, you know, the Conservatives let them have that space? Can we not do something interesting with it? So at least they're kind of trying. So we're doing that. At the same time, we're trying to engage with, as Karen was saying, different forms of economies, different forms of operating things. It's trying to do both. The problem with it is yeah, it's not simple. It's not without ambiguity. It's not without paradox or contradiction or any of those things. So, but you know, we're not going to find a space that isn't, or it seems very hard.
Hello. Hello, Mark. It's not Gary anymore. Sarah. I found myself really relating a lot to what you... I loved your manifesto, and was really listening hard to what you were saying about writing, because I was talking a bit about that myself. Coming from somewhere very connected and also very disconnected, I think, in relationship to you, particularly a kind of feminist history of debates on writing, going back from Haraway to Sisu, etc., yeah, where writing embodiment, writing situatedness is an issue, it's a burden, it's a strategy. And then I was trying to connect the glitching and writing together, and wanted to hear a bit more about that. And if glitching is a kind of writing, I guess what I want to know is, where's it happening, where's it coming from, and what does it want? I guess I'm referring to what you were suggesting about the connections between system, cybernetics, and fiction. Your canon of fiction I recognise, but it's gendered. So where does the glitching happen in relationship to system, in relationship to not so much author, but authority?
Yep, great questions. If you may not be familiar with my '97 work, Grammatron. It was out there before Web 2.0, and it starts off with the word écriture, and then it goes to a creature, and then it moves into a writing machine. And so it's kind of a reading of Sisu and Derrida's grammatology, but it's narrativized, I like to say metafictionalized, within what at the time was called hypertextual space, soon to become net art, as they tagged it. And so that's kind of where my connection to some of the French post-structuralist writers and trying to find ways, for some sort of textual frottage between the different texts and seeing ways to remix them within a new media context started taking shape. It was soon thereafter, say the third part of my net art trilogy. So Grammatron was first, Phoneme or Phone Me or Phony Me, depending how you pronounce it, was second, and Film Text was third, and that was actually commissioned by the ICA and PlayStation 2 as part of the How to Be an Internet Art retrospective that I had, I think it was in 2001, 2002. And soon thereafter, I was invited to a few places to actually perform film text, which I thought was a net artwork. So performing, I wasn't quite sure what that meant in terms of the invitation. And so I didn't want to go and do it like a typical demo, even though the film text work, which I can't show you right now, or I would, is an interactive kind of like remix writing machine. But the difference, you might say, between what I was doing with Grammatron and what I was doing with film text was that I was starting to integrate more video imagery. And so as a part of that invitation to, or as a result of that invitation to perform film text, both in Switzerland and in Japan, I decided to get into what was then developing as live audio visual performance, or what we were calling VJing, right? Video or visual jockey performance. And it was during that time of traveling and experiencing different levels of memory and remix and accessing or capturing source material wherever I was, and remixing that into each successive performance, that I started getting into the idea of developing the idea of image écriture, something like an image writing, but again, looking at it from a practice-based research perspective, taking some of the ideas of writing out of the body, but using the source material that I was engaging with and capturing as part of the tour, right? Every story is a travel story, a spatial practice. And so the more I did that, the more I saw the interaction with the technology, with the network and with my laptop glitching images. And I found that quite interesting. And so then it became an instrumental part of my developing artist theory of image écriture, which I develop in the first section of Metadata, which is a book I published in 2007. So that's how I kind of bring it all into the writing, live performance, image mix.
I'll take us back to the space concept. As a digital artist myself, I find working more and more into the cyberspace rather than the physical space, even though I'm almost graduating photography, which is happening in the physical space. My main concern is that by working more and more in the cyberspace, I tend to relate or be members of communities that live there, and of course living in the physical space that creates a gap, let's say, within me, which I'm trying to fill. And both of you talked about spaces that you are creating or will create, and I'm wondering how can these spaces answer questions as this one, because it is inherent to the digital apparatus to live in the cyberspace. How can we bring that to the physical space? And I don't know if you're familiar with, well, there are many artists working in that way that bring objects from the one world to the other, or the New Aesthetics blog from James Brittle. Yeah, that is my personal concern, to be honest.
Well, first of all, it's great that you're digitally connected at university, because when you leave, you're not going to have anyone around you unless you do link up with a space like BOM. So that's brilliant. At least you've kind of tapped into some kind of virtual network that hopefully will, continue for you after uni, and that's really important. I think BOM is certainly trying to bridge the gap and to do things over, for example, Google Hangout and discussions and things like that that will exist virtually and connect up people that it can't physically, which will also be published, open access and all that kind of stuff. Everything that we do, that we can, we'll share. But yeah, I mean, we believe, I guess, when I came to the university, actually, I was kind of more interested in the physical relationship and what's kind of happened as a result of more interaction through, digitally and virtually, and how that affects the kind of people that we are and our relationships and all that sort of thing. And maybe through the kind of research of just talking to loads of people, loads of artists and peers and whatever, what emerged is that it's really important for people to have a physical space, and that actually that is really missing today. The physical spaces are really kind of missing today as well. So hopefully we can try and do a bit of both. But I don't know, Mark. What do you think, Mark?
Well, we're as I was suggesting, we're actually hybridizing it so that we're very interested in bringing it out in the community. Unfortunately, when you live in a kind of upper middle class community like Boulder, you don't have access to these spaces like BOM. This is one of the reasons why I spend so much time in the UK and other parts of the world, because it's very difficult to start and sustain these kinds of spaces in most parts of the US. So what we do is we have to sort of actively collaborate and partner, let's say, with spaces that already exist that are being developed by oftentimes socially conscious and aesthetically aware entrepreneurs who are starting, say, alternative presses, but are turning their shop into a gallery, which then becomes a performance space. And so through performances and exhibitions and partnering with events that take place off the campus, but then also partnering with alternative, say, digital or electronic sound festivals that take place within the region, and having them come into our seminar space or into our black box space and bring folks from the community who are engaged with the emerging, social media network environment, and bringing them into our spaces on campus, and then turning them on to the kinds of research that we're doing, which sometimes is actually quite simpatico. I think you really, it takes a lot of work to do that, of course, because it takes you away from your research, because you're actual, developing and, say, loosely finishing your outcomes so that they can get out there. But it's definitely worth it, because what you're doing is you're building this community that exists both in person and online. So it's kind of worth it, actually.
I think we need to stop there. So I'd like to thank all our fantastic speakers of today, and I hope we can give them a big final applause too.